إذا مساء الخير كل من يتابعنا عبر لايف جديد وويبينار جديد من الشبكة العربية لمدققي المعلومات AFCN. فقط ننتظر بعضا من الوقت حتى يكتمل الحضور. يمكن حتى نبدأ، ممكن الحضور يمكنهم التعريف بأنفسهم عبر الشات. من أين أنتم؟ من أي دولة؟ من أي مدينة؟ لدينا متابعون من عدة مدن وبلدان، من مصر، تركيا، اليمن، العراق. الكثير من المتابعين من مصر واليمن. أيضا المغرب، سوريا، فرنسا والأردن. إذا أهلا بكم جميعا من كل الأقطار العربية وغير العربية من يتابعوننا في هذا الويبينار الثاني من مشروع صح للعام 2023، والذي تنظمه الشبكة العربية لمدققي المعلومات AFCN من أريج ضمن برنامج قريب، والذي تنفذه الوكالة الفرنسية للتنمية الإعلامية CFI وتموله الوكالة الفرنسية للتنمية AFD. هذا الويبينار سنتحدث فيه بشكل من التفصيل مع ضيوفنا عن الذكاء الاصطناعي وتدقيق المعلومات. أين نقف اليوم؟ أين يقف مدققي المعلومات وعملية تدقيق المعلومات من التقنية التي احتلت مجالات كثيرة ومختلفة من الحياة، وفي قلبها المشهد الإعلامي. نجد غرف أخبار تسعى إلى تبني الكثير من تقنيات الذكاء الاصطناعي، نجد مؤسسات إعلامية تتحدث عن الموضوع وتناقشه من كل جوانب متعلقة بالأخلاقيات، جوانب متعلقة بالأدوات، الكثير من المجالات والطموحات المرتبطة بالAI. لهذا الغرض كان هذا الويبينار الذكاء الاصطناعي وتدقيق المعلومات. أين نحن اليوم؟ اليوم معنا ضيفين عزيزين. الأول هو توم توينرد، من مؤسس ومدير العمليات في فاثم، ولورنس فيركامب، مؤسس Future Journalism Today. يتحدثون معنا بشيء من التفصيل ويعرضون الكثير من الأمثلة المرتبطة بتدقيق الحقائق والذكاء الاصطناعي. توم ولورنس، أترك معكما المايك لتحدثانا عن أول محطة يجب أن نتوقف عندها، وهي المحطة الأبسط. عندما نذكر كلمة الذكاء الاصطناعي، ماذا نعني تحديداً؟ ماذا نعني بالذكاء الاصطناعي؟
Well, that's a good question to start, and I'd almost want to throw it back because I think everybody has a different idea of what artificial intelligence is. Some people think about it like the Terminator in the great Arnold Schwarzenegger films, and some people think about it like Siri or Alexa. And those are two very different examples, right? So Lawrence and I will tell you a little bit about some different AI concepts. But just to introduce us, we are both with Fathom, and we're a media lab and consultancy and agency. And we try and work with people who are doing interesting and creative things in journalism. And I think fact-checking is one of the really important areas that we work on. And we work with fact-checkers all over the world on capacity building, on training, on developing new tools, and on looking at new ways that fact checkers can build revenue and sustainability. Just to tell you a bit of the story of how why am I here? I'm happy actually to see in the participants some of the people that I've worked with going back to maybe 2012, 2013. I see Mahmoud Ghazail on the call. Hello, Mahmoud. I was a journalist at an organization called Meydan, and we'll talk about Meydan in a little bit. They're an amazing group of technologists and researchers and educators. And we were some of the first people building tools for fact checkers going right back to 2011 and 2012. And so my introduction to fact checking came through technology, some of which relates to AI. I've had the opportunity to work with big networks of fact checkers on big collaborations like Verificado and Crosscheck and Checkpoint. And all of these collaborations have been trying to use technology in interesting and creative new ways to help reach more people, to help make the process of fact checking collaborative and efficient. I think from my perspective, some of the work that's being done by AI specialists around fact-checking is some of the most exciting uses of technology in journalism. I'll hand over to Lawrence to introduce himself.
Thank you, Tom. And well, it's a real privilege to be here together with this wonderful team of the AFCN, and also with Tom. With a little introduction about myself, is I used to work as a Google News Lab teaching fellow, where Samia Aish was a co-worker, so that's how we've met. And I've learned quite a lot about how AI and machine learning in particular can be of value to journalists when during my time at Google. And after that, I wrote a book. Unfortunately for this crowd, I wrote it in Dutch, but the title is The Art of AI. So I've investigated quite some use cases where journalism and people who work in newsrooms can really apply machine learning techniques, but also software that is AI powered. And I think today we would like to show you a variety of tools, because Hajar, it was a very good question. What is AI? Because we see it as a range of tools. By the way, I'm also on the Council of Europe Committee for AI and News Media, and that's where we define AI. We don't have a real definition, but it's a range of tools. And today, Tom, if I'm not mistaken, we would like to show you a range of tools and also use cases, so examples that might inspire you, where you can apply machine learning and AI among very different phases of the journalistic process. But especially we've tried to aim at the fact-checking process, so it's not just for journalists, also for fact-checkers. So Tom, if you could go to the next slide, I can show you how we've sort of divided up our webinar for this session. So we started with introductions. We'll go into AI concepts a bit deeper, and then we'll dive into the different stages of fact-checking: monitoring, claim identification, investigation, and distribution. And as I've said, for each stage, we've tried to come up with an example, but also the more of the technique, the machine learning technique behind those use cases, those examples that we show. So we've got tools and we've got examples, and we're hoping to inspire you. And some you might be familiar with, some you don't know. But before we go into the concepts of AI, we would like to ask you to see how good you are at knowing when text has been written by a computer. And I think I can put something in the chat as well. So this is the link. It's called roft.io. It's an English-based little quiz. And I would like to ask you to play just one game, where you have to see if a sentence was written by a computer or by a human. So you can, they give you a sentence each time, and you have to decide, is this a computer generated sentence, so AI generated, or human generated? So please take a few moments, let's say 3 minutes, to do this yourself and see how good you are, and let us know in the chat if you've managed to get all the points or that you didn't get any points. So if you can go to the link in the chat, it's roft.io/annotate/ and then !playlist is 15. I hope everyone can manage to take, I think in 3 minutes you can play one game, and obviously after this webinar you're allowed to play all the games. But please, let's see how good you are at knowing when text has been written by a computer. So take some moments. And if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'll be happy to answer. So I hope everyone is playing right now. Please update us on the points that you've got.
I'm also going to play. Oh dear.
So let's take another 2 minutes from now on until we continue. So 2 minutes left.
Seeing some good questions coming in. We'll definitely get to both of these questions. Thank you so much, Moath and Noor.
Yes, and with that, I would like to know who managed to get. I think you can get 5 points if you've guessed all the texts right. I must say, I never got to 5 points, and I've tried it quite a lot, this quiz, over the last couple of days, and it's really hard to see if a text was written by a machine or a human. Tom, what did you get? How many points?
I got 2 points.
And maybe there are some people already who are familiar with ChatGPT. We'll go into that a bit more later on. There is a similar sort of technique, which is called GPT, behind this quiz. And it's also there for recipes and speeches. But obviously, we've put it in here to see if it could write news articles on its own. And so could write false or fake news articles as well. This was just as a warm-up, so I hope you managed to score some points. If there's anyone who would like to make a remark or share their points, if they managed to get all the machine-generated quotes busted in a way, please let us know. But you can obviously tell us later on as well. So without any further ado, we'd like to continue with definitions. And Tom, if I may hand over to you.
Yeah, so as we discussed, and the great starting point for this conversation was, what is AI? While we've been working with Arij on their AI strategy, we've been looking at many different definitions, because some people talk about it as a set of technologies. Some people talk about it as being software-based or virtual-based. Some people talk about it as automation. Here you can see that I've actually asked ChatGPT to define AI, and it defines it as a field of computer science. And whenever we're thinking about AI and trying to solve problems with AI, it's worth trying to think about what AI means for us, and some of the concepts that Lauren is going to introduce. So at the moment, we've been working on a working definition of AI for Arij, which is that AI represents a group of technologies that can assist and empower journalists by providing insights and automated support across a range of editorial, operational, and communications tasks. So here, and there's some important words highlighted here, it's about assisting and empowering journalists. In this case, it's not about trying to replace anyone. It's about giving people those extra tools that they can use that might take away some parts of their job that are boring or frustrating or repetitive, and allow the amazing journalists at Arij to focus on the really amazing work that they're doing, both in investigations, but also in fact-checking. So now we're going to just talk quickly about some different concepts that underpin AI. And so often when you hear about AI, it will also be, people will also use many other terms to talk about different parts of it. And so we're going to give you some definitions, and then we're going to show you where you might have seen these concepts in the real world. So the first definition, and you'll hear this a lot, and it was really confusing to me when I started being introduced to this technology, is natural language processing. And put very simply, it's the way that machines try and understand and read and make sense of human language. So machines, if you drill right down to the very core of how a computer works, and that also relates to also goes to AI, it's ones and zeros, right? It's all ones and zeros. How can a machine that fundamentally thinks about ones and zeros understand human language, which is so rich and so complex? And I think you will have all seen NLP in the real world if you've ever used something like Google Translate. So Google Translate works, it's not changing words from one language to another based on rules. It's looking and understanding those words in context. So the reason my voice is very bad is because yesterday I went to a football match. If I wanted to translate, yesterday I went to a football match from English into Arabic, Google Translate will tell me, it won't say, now match, but match in English, it could be kibrit, it could be mubara, it could be many other things. But Google Translate is able to understand that in the context of the sentence, match is talking about football. So this is a very simple and common way of thinking about natural language processing. There's a good question about, what about in Arabic? And I think there's a lot of topics that we can go into that relate to that. But what we have seen over the past 2 years really has been a big increase in the number of tools and technologies that work for Arabic. Fundamentally, the reason that fewer tools have been available in Arabic in the past is because there's a lack of NLP data in Arabic. That's starting to change. And so now we can use tools like Ketib which will allow you to transcribe an interview that you might do with a source, and it will take audio and it will convert it into text. And it will go beyond that, and it will identify, now Hajar is talking, now Tom is talking. So all of this is a really practical example of how AI can help journalists. Lawrence.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And that is really a practical example of two of the same techniques, natural language processing. So on the one hand, it can process texts, and on the other hand, it can process voice, so speech-based texts. So it doesn't even matter if it's audio, video, or written. It understands natural language, in a way you could say. And that is all sort of based on machine learning, which when we talk about AI, we mostly refer to machine learning, and that's it's an artificial intelligence subdomain or discipline, you could say, which doesn't need any rules but can learn rules. So you have to train it with examples, and based on the examples that you give it, alongside with labels, it sort of extracts rules from those examples. So if you're looking for, could be, say, different desserts, like kanafa or something else, then if you show it a lot of pictures and you put the label kanafa on each picture where we can see kanafa, then it can distinguish it from other desserts. So that's how you sort of train a machine to understand and distinguish between images, but it could also be documents or texts. And that is basically machine learning, where we know the word algorithm, where you as a human, say a developer, a programmer, writes the code for each rule in the algorithm. With machine learning, the machine writes those rules itself based on the examples that you, a human, give. Now, this is an example I think that Tom usually gives, but when you buy something on Amazon, and in this case, it might be something you've bought for your home, then it also knows, I don't know, it might be that you've bought, I don't know, it could be anything for your house, or maybe for your kitchen, maybe some cleaning kit for your kitchen, and it knows, because so many people who bought something for their kitchen, they also bought maybe stuff like this, as you can see, a broom, or a garbage can, even coffee beans, because that might belong in the kitchen. So based on all these different users before you, consumers before you, who bought A, also bought B and C or D. So this is where it recommends. And when we talk about recommendation engines, these are all machine learning based techniques. So where they take the power of having a lot of data on the same kind of items that people buy, and in order to recommend that to you, to suggest that. Tom, is that the way you describe it, more or less?
Yeah. And I think I don't know how much Amazon there is in the region, but you will have all experienced the
Netflix, for example. It gives you
Netflix
series or movies based on what other people are watching. It says you might like this too, because people that watch similar shows, similar films or movies also watch this, so maybe this might be something for you.
Or the YouTube play next. You know, I'm sure lots of people have watched a video on YouTube that they intended to go and watch, and then automatically YouTube is going to play you another video, and then you can lose hours. I've definitely lost hours, and you end up watching videos that are about something completely different. But YouTube, through machine learning, has taken you on this journey.
And you see it in other areas as well, especially with news publishers. They do a lot of the most people that work in machine learning and at the publishing or in newsrooms, they work on recommendations. So say if you've read these articles, maybe you would like to subscribe to our newsletter that is about celebrities, or that is about sports, because we see you've read a lot of articles about sports. Here's our newsletter, or here's our podcast on sports. So this is also a recommendation that news publishers use quite often. And before we go into the fact-checking process, we have some other examples that you might be familiar with, because I think over the last 9 months, starting around summer last year, generative AI went to become very public with OpenAI, a company that released DALL-E, was for images, but also ChatGPT, which can generate texts. And as it says here, definition, generative AI as any type of AI that can be used to create. So it cannot just sort of understand and process, like with text that we saw, that it can recognize images or objects in images, but it can also generate images, video, audio, anything that can be digital. It can generate on its own. And we've got two examples. So the first one is, maybe if you've encountered this person does not exist. So what we're looking at here are 6 persons that do not exist. These are pixels which are sort of brought together in a way that a computer thought this might be a human. And if we look at those on first glance, we think these are humans too, but these people do not exist, hence the name of the URL. This person does not exist. So generative AI is now able to create these kinds of images of people that don't exist. So we're looking at illustrations in a way. These are pixels that sort of we perceive as real human beings, but they aren't. Now, this is what can be done with imagery, but also for video. So if we could go to the next video, and it's a clip about life during the Russian offensive. It's animated with AI. And you can see the translation, and it says here, first-hand stories animated with AI. So it takes 1 minute 40. So let's just look at a bit of it.
Здесь была серая зона, это была нейтральная полоса. Вот там направо была украинская армия, а вот там слева была русская. Посередине здесь летали бомбы, мины. Бомбы, мины, бомбы, мины, бомбы, мины, бомбы. Так вот в течение дня постоянно. Сосед мой пошел заряжать аккумулятор, вот здесь была машина. И он сказал мне вечером, говорит, пойду я, наверное, с этой машины вытащу аккумулятор, зарядить телефон, потому что все телефоны сели, света нет. Я говорю, не надо, конечно. Но тем не менее, наверняка он пошел. Он пошел, до следующий день его уже нет. И через неделю я узнал, что его застрелили. Говорят, что во время торнадо в центре спокойнее всего, то...
It's okay to stop it here. So these last images that you saw with this car that was bombed hasn't been photographed by a human, or this image which we see right here. These are all generated with AI. So this newsroom called Semaphore, it's just started last year. It was founded by former New York Times journalist and Bloomberg journalist. They founded this digital newsroom called Semaphore. And they put these videos on YouTube. So it's an eyewitness account of the Ukraine, the Russian invasion in Ukraine. From the story he tells, there are no images. So they've asked an AI, by using his own words of the eyewitness, using his words, putting them in as a prompt into generative AI. And the AI made these images up. The images that we see right here has been generated by generative AI. In this case, it was Midjourney. And this newsroom decided to illustrate this first-hand account of this eyewitness with generative AI. So this could be a possible use where journalists use generative AI to enhance their storytelling. And there are many different views on how to use this, when and why they use this. We show this as an example, and it might be an inspiration, but you might also be horrified that people actually use this. It's all good, but we show it that it already is happening. Tom.
Yeah, and then another couple of examples. I think I'd be curious if to know how many of you have used ChatGPT. This was the very first time that I'd used ChatGPT. It was, I think it was early December last year, and I asked a question I think about a lot. And I was really blown away by not just the quality of the language and how human it looks, but the relatively insightful and thoughtful response that I got. Now, there's many critiques of ChatGPT, and we can talk about some of the limitations of it and some of the risks of it. But we've also experimented and played with this in Arabic. Its Arabic is pretty good, and I think it's the thing to remember about ChatGPT is that this is not something that's
أعتقد توم
actually.
أحد المشاركين كان يتحدث عن أنه استخدم شات جي بي تي فعلا، ولكن كان أكثر ما يقلقه مسألة المصادر، أن الإجابات التي تظهر له لا يوجد لها مصادر، وكان أكثر ما يقلقه هذه المسألة.
Yeah, so ChatGPT is trained on a big body, a huge body of historic data. So it's not plugged into the internet, which might sound strange, but if you ask it a question about something that happened yesterday, it's not going to be able to give you an answer. And as is pointed out, there's an absence of references, right? So often if we asked a question, we'd want to know where does that information come from? And I'd say this in general is a limitation of AI, which is that sometimes we're going to get information given to us by an AI system, and our first question will be, well, how do you know that? Or have you made that decision? And so I think in journalism, it's particularly important that when we're thinking about using AI, that we're able to answer that question, and we don't try and build tools that are like a black box. We say in English, it's like a black box. It means something's happening, and all we see is the thing that goes in and the things that come out. But actually, for us, it's really important that we can understand what's happening in that black box and what are the sources. So for sure, there are limitations, but it's also an amazingly powerful tool. ChatGPT can fix code for applications and websites. It can create slogans. It can summarize long articles into tweets. And so there are many uses of this, and fundamentally it's a generative approach. Now, ChatGPT was the first shot that was fired, and now we know Google is launching or has launched, is it called Lambda?
Bard.
Yeah, Bard. Facebook is launching a similar tool. People have been sharing screenshots of Microsoft Bing, which has a generative GPT, which is plugged into the internet. So will provide more recent information. But it's not just text, as Lauren said, or images. We can also generate music from text. So Google released Music LM, which is a very interesting model. You can type a little description of what you'd like to hear, and then the AI will go away and make that. So again, it's something that we can sometimes use. I think the semaphore example is a really powerful one of showing how generative AI can support storytelling and help us tell stories that are more engaging and compelling. It's so important in that case that we hear the voice of one of the survivors of the Russian invasion, one of the eyewitnesses, that we can hear that. I think the AI video that supports that is a really powerful example.
I can elaborate a bit more on this one. This is an interesting one, considering when you build automation tools, which is happening more and more in the newsroom because the costs are getting very, very low. And this is what people have also with self-driving cars, on where to sort of see where you feel comfortable. And I know this example from the Netherlands, where I'm from. Say when there are general elections in our country, then we've got some newsrooms and then there's a sort of official body that calls the final results. And the moment the final results are called, say per municipality, the system can write its own article about a certain municipality in the Netherlands and says, this is what happened. These parties, these were elected. Mostly they won the popular vote and stuff like that. And they test it beforehand, but when elections are there, they don't. They trust the system. So they're around level 7. The system executes tasks automatically and informs the human. You can think about this for stock exchanges, sports matches, maybe weather forecasts, maybe when there are criminal records released or traffic injury data released. Then more and more newsrooms are using these systems to automate these kinds of articles. So it's a bit, there's a distinction between an AI written article with ChatGPT, or when you automate and say it's more like a template, like when you know there's a football match, when the Tottenham Hotspurs encounter another team, then you probably know it's 90 minutes. There can only be 3 results, like the one team wins or the other ones, or it's a draw. And then things happen, but it's very there are a lot of not a lot of random things happening. It's all followed according to some script and routine, like with stock exchanges and other data. So for these kinds of situations, you can use automation fairly well. And imagine if you're in the Netherlands and you have to write 326 of these election articles for each municipality. You might make a mistake every once in a while, or when it's the end of your work week. So this is where automation might be very helpful, and also in checking, because a machine might not make the same mistakes as you, but there need to be a lot of checking beforehand. But we're just showing you this because you might be in a situation with your newsroom or at your fact-checking organization where you're thinking about automating a certain part of the work, and we will show you a fact-checking automation part of the process. And then having this this schema help you decide with your team where you want your system, how it must work, that it might have to ask a human first to say okay, and then release this piece of information. So this might be just a guide to help you guide discussions.
So we have an interesting question from Hisham. He says, chatbots will eliminate us as journalists in the near future, and thus our work will shift from producing journalism to filtering false and misleading journalism. What role should we play in the next stage?
Ooh, that's a very good question, and I'm really sure that chatbots will not eliminate journalists. I think you will work alongside with them, and there will be a limited number of use cases where they are helpful. And I think to come up with stories, come up with a perspective, to feel what people are saying and to know what people are talking about, which is important to them, to empathize with the people you write for or that you make documentaries or podcasts for, is something that chatbots will never be able to do. They cannot reason. They are more, as they say, probabilistic instead of deterministic. So for each time you ask the same question, you get a different answer each time. So that's not something to really count on each time for the same use case. So maybe if you're staring at a blank page, it might be of help. Or maybe if you want to summarize some information that you've gathered, it might help. But I think there are many more use cases where journalists and humans are much needed. And there are some cases where you could help it alongside as a sort of co-worker or co-pilot. But yeah, we'll go into some of these examples. So yeah, this is a Gartner's AI maturity model, and this helps especially organizations to think about where they are when it comes to how mature they are with using AI. So you might have an interest. So there's awareness with risk of overhyping. I think that's exactly what's happening now with the Bing and the ChatGPT implementations, and also why Google is rushing, because they think they might lose the search war. So instead of getting a list of answers, you get a sort of natural story, a natural answer. Some people are experimenting, and some people are using it in production. And I think most newsrooms aren't on level 5 yet, because that's then you need to have all your data already in place and already have a strategy and principles of when to use and when not to use. So I think most newsrooms and organizations are now thinking about AI, experimenting a bit, and maybe using transcription services or some automation tools, maybe something for editing. So this is where we see in the field most newsrooms and fact checkers operate.
So Marwa has a good question, which will lead us happily into our next section, which is what are the AI techniques that can be used in journalism other than ChatGPT? So we're going to give you some use cases, firstly from the world of investigative journalism, and then we'll look at some of the ways that fact checkers in particular are using AI. So because I think actually these are maybe two of the most, for me, interesting areas. And I think it's important to also say at this stage that this is not that new as a field. So when we talk about ICIJ's work, it's the International Center for Investigative Journalism, they've been using AI for many years. And what AI allows them to do is to look at large sets of documents. So think about the Panama Papers, for example. There's millions and millions of pages of documents that it would be impossible for even a big team of journalists to go through in a timely way. And they will use machine learning to spot patterns in those documents. So the medical devices investigation they looked at, again, in this case, I think it was hundreds of thousands, if not millions of records about medical devices. And they, without having to read through all of those documents, they were able to identify patterns. One pattern was that these documents didn't refer to whether the patient was a man or a woman, but the machine was able to infer that by looking at the pronouns in the record. So it wouldn't say if it's a man or a woman, but the description of the incident would say he or she. And so as a very basic first step, they were able to separate these documents and say, these 200,000 documents relate to women, and these 200,000 relate to men. Now, what they noticed when they did that is that the medical devices were found to have many more problems for women than men. So already there's a story there, and they proceeded to investigate many different angles of this. And I'd really encourage you to check out the reporting that they did. And in this case, none of that would be really possible without using a tool like AI and machine learning, both with supervised and unsupervised learning. Another example that I really love is BuzzFeed trained an AI to search for spy planes. Now, what you can see here in a couple of locations are circles, which is where planes are flying around and around and around and around and around for hours, or backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards for a long time. And so they were able to identify and document different parts of the US that were being surveilled by law enforcement by looking at, by having the machine look at data from tools like flight radar. And then finally, and I think, actually, we've got a couple of examples. A really interesting example, and this is a really rich area for investigation, is to use, to teach machines to interpret satellite imagery. So in this case, a Ukrainian organization called Texty taught a machine what an illegal amber mine, so an illegal mine, what it looks like from a satellite. And so they taught it and they gave it, I don't know, 15, 20 examples of this. And then they asked the machine to look at the whole of Ukraine and could it identify other mines or other possible mines. And so they were able to build a really rich map of and show really the scale of the problem of illegal mining. And they're looking over a vast area, so 70,000 square kilometers. And again, no journalist is going to be able to go through frame by frame of 70,000 square kilometers of satellite imagery. It's only through a machine that we can work at this scale. So it's not that, and to go back to Hisham's question, None of these examples are possible without the machine. They're also not possible without the journalists. So I think these are really good examples of where AI is allowing us to do really good journalism that we would not have otherwise been able to do. And this also can be used in our world. So I think there's many fact checkers on the call, and that's my background. This is a related case where a group of German newsrooms looked at comments on Facebook, and they trained a machine to identify hate speech. Now, hate speech is illegal in Germany, and it's Facebook's responsibility to remove it where possible. Now, and Facebook will always say that we're able to remove 98% of hate speech using AI. Well, this investigation found that there was really a lot of illegal hate speech on the platform, and it was the machine. In this case, we all know that actually Facebook does miss cases of hate speech. In this case, the machine was able to provide data and provide evidence that this was happening. So the story, we all know that the story is there. We've all got the hypothesis, but how do you report on that with enough data to publish? Well, in this case, the machine is going to be providing that data by looking at many, many comments and saying, we've identified 20,000 incidents of hate speech.
And I can talk a bit more about, we have two last examples from the Netherlands, because I'm quite familiar with these and also the people who did these projects. And again, as Tom said, this is something you could not do without AI or machine learning, but also not without the journalist asking the right kind of questions and research questions for their investigation. This was something by a newspaper in the Netherlands, De Groene Amsterdammer. It's called Data and Debate. And what they set out to do is, before our general elections in 2021, so the 6 months to the run-up, they've downloaded over 1 million tweets, and they wanted to know how much hate female politicians get online, especially on Twitter. And then they had to train the machine. They had to classify each tweet to see what the hate was aimed at. So if you could go to the next slide, Tom. Here you can see this was their annotation scheme for misogyny, and they used a scheme which was already been used by Amnesty International. So they don't have to figure this out all by themselves. So what they did, they took a tweet, and gebruiker means user, and it was aimed at some female politician, and it said ugly fat traitor. And then they had to say if it's aggressive, hateful, or nothing. In this case, I think they chose hateful. And they chose age and body. So they could choose gender, ethnicity, religion, age, body, or miscellaneous. So they've done it with a team of 4 people with different backgrounds, women and men on the team. And they did, I think, 2,600 tweets. So for each and every one, imagine a spreadsheet, 2,600 tweets, and for each tweet you have to say, is this aggressive, hateful, or nothing? And then if it's aggressive or hateful, does it go in the box of gender, ethnicity, religion, age, body, or miscellaneous? And so they did this for 2,600 tweets. Then they compared so what the others had, because they had the same tweets, and where they differed, where they have different classifications for these the same tweets, they had a discussion. So they had to find consensus to not interpret, but to really be sure this kind of tweet belongs in that box. And when they had an agreement, they used these over 10,000 tweets to train the machine. And with these 10,000 tweets, they could analyze over 1 million tweets. And with that, they said they've built a wall of data, which goes beyond the anecdotal evidence. But they like any good journalist, they also interviewed these politicians, because they were for national office. They ran for national office. So they also interviewed this as a really, quite primary journalistic task. But they also applied machine learning to show how much of these tweets, of these 1.3 million that were aimed at politicians, how much do contain hate, and what kind of hate, and who gets the most hate and why. And so they could ask a lot of really journalistic questions, but they could not have done it without the machine. Now, the very last example, again, this was text, so this is natural language processing. The last is computer vision, and this is about the Russian trenches in Ukraine. And if we can go to the next slide, what the team did of the Volkskrant, which is a Dutch national daily newspaper, they analyzed satellite imagery where they found trenches. They put it in the box trenches, and where they didn't see a trench, they put it in the box not trench. And then they trained a model based on these images, and then it could distinguish after 4 generations, because it takes you some iterations. It's almost never right the first time, so because there were some false negatives. I think at the 4th iteration, the 4th version, they had a model that was really accurate, and so then they've got their hands on the entire, near real-time satellite data of the region. And with all the dots you see, this is the eastern part with the Donbass of Ukraine. They could actually show you where all these trenches were dug by the Russians. So they used a machine to train, to be able to spot. The same thing with the illegal emerald mining Tom was telling you about, was done to discover trenches. And you can imagine that it mistook a trench for a small river or a farm road, and then they had to retrain. So that's why it took a couple of versions before they were very accurate. And with that, they could tell a story about why 100 years maybe after World War I in Europe, military was still digging these trenches, why, and how much. So there were hundreds of kilometers, and still. So it made a great article and great investigation, and they said that the audience was really interested in. So it was really well read. And again, this is something that set out from a journalistic question and investigation, but couldn't have been done on this scale without machine learning. So these were some more broader examples how you can apply AI and machine learning in different parts of the journalistic task. And now we will dive into the different stages of fact checking. Tom.
Yeah, before we do that, I think maybe we can just take a few questions. And thank you so much for all of these smart and interesting questions. We have one question from Ali, which is, do you think that facts provided by AI are more objective than human? I don't know if you've got a view on that, or I can take that one.
Now, I know that that with these Chat GPT kind of applications, they will probably not be really thorough and really trustworthy, because you can't trust these Chat GPT, and otherwise they might not give you an answer. Because I've learned that I listened on an American podcast. Someone asked if there were to be a female president, what would be her gender? And then ChatGPT says, well, gender is a construct, and that's something people call woke. So someone said, so ChatGPT is beyond woke. So in some cases, it doesn't want to tell you the facts, which you don't have to argue about, like in this example. So this is what I know, and I wouldn't trust ChatGPT when it comes to facts. No.
And I think beyond ChatGPT, something that's really important to understand about AI is that AI tools and systems are made by humans, and they're made using data selected by those humans. So there's a really interesting field of discussion and scholarship around what's called algorithmic bias, which is that facial recognition tools, at least the ones developed in Europe and the US, are often very good at identifying white faces, but they're very bad at identifying black faces or non-white faces. And so I don't think we can say that AI is more objective than human. It may appear more objective than human because we know if we're getting a fact from a person or a publication that they're going to have some view, and we can there's only kind of one level of abstraction. With AI, because it's coming from a machine, and because we generally trust what computers are telling us. If I put a formula into Excel, I can generally trust the answer. Or if I ask Word to spell check my blog post, I can usually trust the answer. But in this case, it's not necessarily true. We need to also understand the source data. Ibrahim has a good question. I worked on article classification models with AI and other tools to analyze text. All the tools work on English, and even though NLP is poor with Arabic, so are there any tools for Arabic? I think this is a good question. I'd have to look specifically into. We'd have to go away and do some research on article classification tools in Arabic. But I know that Arij is working on some really interesting challenges that relate to this. One challenge is how well machines are able to read different kinds of Arabic script. And again, there's just a lack of data fundamentally, and so the more work that we can do to generate that language data, the better. I know that Midan also, for example, at least in the very early days of our work, this was a very important topic for us. How could we generate more language data for Arabic? So I think Arabic is always going to be, progress is going to be slower, but I think what I've seen in the past couple of years is that the tools are getting a lot better. Are there any other questions here? هل هناك دراسات إعلامية عن ChatGPT؟ وهل من المتوقع أن ينجح استخدام؟
طبعا
Yeah, sorry, I'm just reading
a
question written in Arabic.
Yeah. Okay. هناك سؤالين بالعربي. الأول هو عن الديب فيك. ربما يعني نعطي فقط هنت لبعض ربما الناس اللي مش ممكن ما يكونوش على معرفة أو بالمصطلح، إنه لو تتذكرون هذا الفيديو الشهير لرئيس الأسبق الأمريكي أوباما الذي أطلقته باز فيد، وهي كان ديب فيك للرئيس الأمريكي أوباما يتحدث عن الميس انفورميشن. فالسؤال من شيماء كان عن تقنيات الذكاء الاصطناعي، هل ستعمق جرائم التزييف العميق أو الديب فيك؟
Yes, I'd seen there was a question about deep fakes, and I think that that's a real it's a real risk. In general, I'd encourage people not to panic about deep fakes. I think there's been at least probably it was 4 or 5 years ago when the idea of deep fakes became something of a reality, and we had the Obama video, for example, and we've seen more examples recently, because the concept of it can be very scary. But I think if we apply some of the same kind of journalistic rigor that we would apply elsewhere, then we can also uncover deepfakes. There are some tools for detecting them, but it's really an arms race between people who are creating deepfakes and people who are detecting them. But if we look with deepfakes, for example, while a video itself might be very convincing, I would encourage you to think about what is the source of that video, and can you navigate that? I remember very early in the Syrian conflict, there was the example of the hero boy video, where this little boy, he bravely runs into sniper fire to rescue his daughter, and then it looks, or his sister, and then it looks like he gets shot, and then he gets up. And it wasn't a technical deepfake, but all of that was made by a filmmaker, right? How did journalists debunk that? It was by looking at the source of that video and realizing that it was only the source account had only been made 2 days ago. They'd never published any other videos, and all of a sudden they publish one video that's getting tens of millions of views. Now, this is something that should raise red flags for us as journalists, right? And it's not based on any technical analysis of the content, it's by looking at the source. So you need to understand that these techniques and these risks exist, and think about, as a journalist, how can you get around them? Mahmoud is sorry about spamming us with this question, but any tools that can help us in the process of detecting or monitoring news and breaking news? There's a whole category of AI tools. I can think about Banjo and Samdesk and Data Miner. These are all tools that are monitoring constantly social networks and identifying incidents that might be interesting. So these tools are actually very good. The problem with them is that they're very expensive. So yes, that technology exists. I don't have access to them. I can't afford them. Some big newsrooms are using them, and I'm not sure how well they're doing in Arabic. Okay, should we talk about fact checking? Hajar, is that okay? Or do you want to take more questions?
يعني أعتقد هناك سؤال ربما لا يرتبط بشكل أساسي بموضوع الويبينار، لكن لطيف إن احنا ناخده كمثال على ما هو AI وما هو ليس AI. ولدينا سؤالين الحقيقة، واحد بالعربية والثاني بالإنجليزية، عن صحافة الواقع المعزز. هل صحافة الواقع المعزز لها علاقة بالذكاء الاصطناعي أو يدخل فيها بشكل أو بآخر؟
Yes, it does. I can answer that one, because when we talk about augmented reality, it mostly means that you put some digital information on top of the physical world. And in order to do that, it could be your smartphone, obviously, or maybe even these glasses, these goggles that you put on. It has to be aware of the real world. So it has to have some kind of camera where it can see the real world. And that's to see, that's what we call computer vision. And Tom has a nice little schema on the next slides. So therefore, AI is being used because computer vision is part of machine learning. So it can see objects in the real world and can detect them and can tell you this is a chair, this is a tree, this might be a car. And then it might overlay some information on these objects or on the street that you are. Like, for example, with Google Street View, you have live Street View when you're walking around the city where you've never been. It tells you where to go. And so it knows where the crossroads are, or traffic lights. So yes, for augmented reality media, AI is needed, especially to make sense of the visual part of the world, and so that it can add digital information on top of the physical world it sees with computer vision, which is AI. Yes.
طبعا من اللطيف ملاحظة أنه حتى الآن هناك من يلعب اللعبة التي اقترحها لورنس في بداية الويبينار. سعيدة حصلت على نقطتين. وهناك الكثير من يعني علامات يعني السعادة بالأمثلة المختلفة التي تعطى على ال AI ومفاهيمه المختلفة خلال هذا الويبينار. فأعتقد إن إحنا نقدر يعني نستطيع أن ندخل في جزء آخر من الويبينار، وهو جزء المثير يمكن لب الموضوع، وهو استخدام ال AI في عملية تدقيق المعلومات.
Even more exciting. Yes. So my background was, I was one of the early people working in fact checking, and one reason I'm so happy to see AFCN existing is I was working to try and develop fact checking in the region, and so I'd be curious to hear from you all as fact checkers about the stages of the process that you think about. But in preparing this, we thought about 4 stages of fact checking. The first stage is the stage of monitoring. This is looking out into the world and seeing what is there to fact check, or what should I be focusing on. And we'll come back to the examples below. But at the top of this slide, you can see the different applications, the concepts that we've talked about already. So monitoring is finding out what's going on in the information ecosystem. Claim identification and matching is understanding from maybe our monitoring system has flagged an article, and maybe the article is 1,000 words long. How do we know what inside that article we need to be fact checking? So the process, claim identification is the process of understanding speech or text or video, and saying, you as a fact checker, you need to look at this. The matching side is if a politician says, over the past 5 years, we've decreased taxes by 15%. The matching piece is that maybe there's public data that can answer that question and say, that's not true, or that is true, and explain and show the source of that data. There's also an element, and I think this is familiar to lots of you, of needing to investigate a claim or an image or a video, depending on what kind of fact checking you're doing. And there's also AI tools that can help us with that process. And then finally, how do we publish and distribute our fact checks? And we've got a nice example of how AI is helping that. And I think that in that distribution phase, we can also think about some of the storytelling examples that Lawrence has provided. So how do we take a text fact check and turn it into a video? That's something that's going to become easier and easier for you all, because generative video AI is an increasingly rich field. So if we start with monitoring, we can start with the Google fact check tools.
If I can come in, yes. So I don't know if you're all familiar with this, and this could be just as a first place to start. It's done by Google, but it has all kinds of fact checkers working along, and this is also about distribution, but also monitoring. So as you can see, there are some fact checks about the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. And so it could be a place to start if you're doing a fact check, if these things have already been checked, or if you're looking for an idea on inspiration to fact check. So just as a starter, this has no AI, but maybe it wasn't in your toolbox already. So this might become handy. Just therefore, yeah.
And I think I think there is some AI working here, because I can see on the right-hand side that something has extracted these entities, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And topics. So there's an AI that's looking at these fact checks, and it's saying, oh, this one is about Ukraine and Putin and Viktor Medvedchuk. Now, there are many people working in fact checking on AI. A couple of the most prominent would be the Duke Reporters Lab, who have a whole program dedicated to technology that supports fact checking. They've been working on a system called Squash. Squash will let you take a speech that's being given by a politician. It will convert in near real time that speech into text, and it will filter out anything that is a non that's not a claim. So opinions cannot be fact checked, right? Predictions, they can't be fact checked. But statements like insurance companies suck $23 billion out of the system, that is a claim that we can investigate. And so Squash actually goes much further than just the monitoring piece, and it also helps with the investigation and the claim identification, and is suggesting, okay, well, here are 3 sources that can speak to that fact check. Now, what's important here is that Squash is not saying this is the data that relates to that fact. It's saying here are 3 options, maybe one of these relates to that fact. So what's important is this human editor who's going to look at some recommendations provided by an AI system, and is going to make the journalistic decision. So it's a starting point, it's not a finishing point. There's very much still needed a journalist in this process, but is I think a really interesting example, and you should follow the work of the Duke Reporters Lab of Bill and Chris, who've been working on these tools for a long time. Now we'll come back. I didn't put the logo on here, but this is from Midan's website. They're doing very interesting work to try and help fact checkers check claims and images and memes on messaging platforms. And here you can see at the top a similarity analysis. So fact checkers use their tools, and they say to their audiences, please send us things that you would like us to investigate. Now, the way that Midan is using AI is to, firstly, if I send a meme and Hajar sends the same meme and Lauren sends the same meme, an AI can detect that these 3 images are all the same. And that's a monitoring trigger, because it means if 3 people have sent the same thing, then maybe this is going somehow viral on the platform. Or if you're a fact checker in India, if 1,000 people all send you the same link or the same claim, even if it's worded slightly differently, or even if it's in different languages, which is the amazing thing that Midana are doing, it can identify that all of this is talking about the same thing. And therefore, we can match that with an existing fact check that we've already worked on and send it back to the user. So there's we'll come back to the distribution piece, but that first stage of, instead of getting 1 million things, there's a monitoring step, which is to identify and group those 1 million things, because maybe there's going to be patterns in there.
Yeah, and this is a plugin called DuckDuckGoose.ai, and you can see the URL on the top left. And it does merely the same thing as Tom told as Midan does for messaging on social platforms when it comes to text, so natural language processing in a way. This DuckDuckGoose can check deep fakes and pictures. So if we go to the next slide, you see the same sort of schema or flowchart. So a user browses the internet. This starts from the top left. So it has a browser installed, and then with this DuckDuckGoose plugin, it searches for images on the web page. So you see a sort of rolling ball, and then it calculates a hash code. This is fairly technical, but it's the same thing as Tom said. So it analyzes the content of the image and sees if it's already in a database. And there you can see yes and no on the bottom right side. So if it is in the database, it tells you that it might be already familiar, that might be known that it is a deep fake, that it has been tampered with this image or this video, or it might be something that you have to investigate further because this DuckDuckGoose doesn't know it, but it doesn't mean that it's not tampered with. So again, there are these different, the same kind of techniques used for natural language, as Tom showed us in the Midan example, but also for imagery and videos, which DuckDuckGoose is one of the first that is doing this. And again, we don't want you to be too excited because these systems might not be that that well performing at this moment. They might get better, but then on the other hand, as Tom said, it is an arms race or a cat and mouse game. So as these systems get better, the fakers get better too. So it will be sort of game of catch up, an arms race in that respect. Yes.
So if we move from monitoring, so kind of evaluating the information landscape, to claim identification, there's a really strong group of fact checkers that are led by Full Fact and Chequeado and I think Africa Check and I think one other. I'll come back to that. Who are building, again, is a suite of tools that looks at the full process of fact checking. But what they've gotten very good at is identifying within a speech or a text, what are the things that can be fact checked? What are the claims? Now, in my work, I've been working with fact checkers on COVID misinformation. And even this stage, it can be one of the longest and slowest stages. So we're not even talking about investigating claims. Firstly, it's about how do we even know how many claims there are? And if you think about, I don't know if the film Plandemic was seen in the Middle East, but it was an hour-long documentary that contained hundreds of claims, and fact checkers had to watch the whole thing and go through and say, this is the claim, this is the claim, this is the claim. And even that process was taking days. Now, tools like the ones that Full Fact are working on can automate that and make that process much shorter, because here in AI is basically distinguishing between a claim or an assertion, which is based in data, and the rest of speech, which is a really big process. But there's been a lot of development in this space, and I'd really encourage you, if you're particularly interested in fact checking in AI and want to learn more about the tools, then I'd speak to Andy at Full Fact, who's done amazing work on this. Again, this is not something new in 2023. This is something that they've been working on for a number of years. So I think it's also important to look at this field of AI, kind of as Lawrence is saying, our first go at something might not be perfect, but because they've been working at it for so long, they now have a tool that is really useful for their team.
Yeah, and this is an example of a Dutch-Flemish collaboration where they used, and Tom used the example before of Claimbuster, which they took as an engine. Again, it's an automatic identification of factual claims that are worthy of a fact check. And the people behind this factrank.org, so it only works with Dutch language-based texts. They say what is worthy of a fact check is something of debate that you can discuss, and there might be disputes. So one of the founders, he told me about a football player in Belgium, and that about his income, his salary, and he said, well, this was totally factual and we could claim it, but wouldn't be relevant because he was hired by a commercial team. So yeah, it's not really relevant for us, and you can't teach a system that is not that relevant, and other claims are. So you encounter many other things, but as Tom said with the previous example from Full Fact, it is actually quite nice, as what the founders of this fact rank told me as well, is that if they've got all these debates from parliament and maybe talk shows on television and radio, they won't have to listen to all these debates and discussions where politicians might show up. they can just have the AI take out the statements that are actual claims and contain facts, and then they can get sort of the signal versus the noise. But then still within these signals there might be too many claims that are actually worth a fact check. So that again will be something that humans have to decide. When you train a system like this, what do you consider worthy? And that means having a lot of discussion and consensus about worthy actually entails.
Oh, sorry, I've lost my screen. 1 second.
Yeah, luckily we can still see it. I think we have another. Yes, this. Tom, I think you found this example. You've texted this to me a couple of days ago, and it's a fact check assistant.
Yeah, so this is from a group in Canada at Toronto, and I think is the kind of first case where we can see some of the integration of a ChatGPT style language model and a database of fact checks. So ChatGPT is a language model that's trained on billions of websites, but is not plugged into a live stream of news or data. Here, the team at Social Media Lab have linked, it's not ChatGPT, but maybe it's GPT-3 in this case, and a fact check database. And so I'd encourage you to play around with this. Again, it's not perfect and they have many disclaimers, but it's an interesting example of can we get to the point of somebody typing into a chat a claim like Joe Biden never went to Ukraine and return a fact check. In this case, they're using Fact Check Explorer API. So what's happening here is that there's a machine which is trying to understand the question that's being asked or the claim. There's a machine that is generating the text to respond, and there's a machine that is matching the question against a database of fact checks. So it's kind of a bit like Midana are doing, but is a very I think this is a really rich area for journalism in general. If we can take people's questions at scale and provide them answers using our journalism, then that's a really useful service and offer that we can make. And so we'll move finally into well, not finally. We've got two more phases to go. Okay, we need to go quickly because there's some good questions. Investigation. So
yeah, I can tell about this, Tom. So you might be familiar with this picture, which showed a couple of days after the earthquake in Syria and Turkey. And there was something wrong with this picture. And although I think the person who uploaded it might have even been on LinkedIn, who wanted to show his loyalty and that he was proud of the rescue fighters that are working and trying to save people from the rubble. You could also tell that there was something wrong with this image because this is generated with AI and people were spreading this as misinformation. So if you look at it closely, and let's go to the next slide, you can see that this hand has 6 fingers, like 5 fingers and a thumb. And we can't see the fifth finger, but it's more below. And you can also look at the ears, which are a bit weird. And generative AI, as they say, can never get hands right because hands aren't really well shown in most pictures. And when they are holding something. So that's why AI didn't really learn how to do hands properly. But you could also have done it in a different way, in an old school way, as Tom said, also as a good fact checker, think about the source, but also about the agenda that might be. Why are people spreading this? What might they gain from spreading this message? Again, here's an example which was also generated by AI. And again, it's the hands that are a bit weird. If you look at it, this man might have 4 fingers on this hand, or maybe 3 and a bit of a weird finger. But there's also this old school way of reverse image search. So if you could click to the next, then I've installed a plugin. I think it's from TinEye, and with this you can image reverse search for all these search engines. You're probably all familiar with this, like with Bing, Yandex, Google. And so if I right click and say do a reverse image search, I can use all the different search engines, and probably will tell me if the picture have already been debunked or been fact checked. So this is one of the things you could use. Obviously, reverse image source is an old trick, and now there's another for video. You might have already been familiar with We Verify InVid. Now there is some money from the European Union. And there's an AI feature being added, and it's for video analysis, and it looks at if a video might have been deep faked. So if it might have elements or frames that are out of touch, or maybe that the lips or the faces aren't moving in a natural way. So it can analyze from frame to frame, which you can see here. It's a bit technical, so I would suggest you play around. We'll provide you with a list of the tools that we show. This is veraai.eu. And then it analyzes an image and even a video with different deep learning filters. So it's what they call an ensemble option. So it looks at many levels, if there might be tampered with contrast or cloned, or that maybe things might have been blurred in the background, which weren't in the in the original picture. So it looks at various levels at images and videos, and then tells you if it thinks there might be a possibility of a manipulation or synthesization, as they call it, or generation with AI. And so there's another tool which you can use as well. It's called Deepware, and you can upload a video here from your, I think you can put in a URL, but also if someone sends you a video or you've downloaded, and it scans and does a deepware prediction. So if we can go one more slide, next slide. Then this was just a random video I had on my computer. This is actually Joy Bulamwini talking about what Tom stated earlier, that black faces are harder to distinguish with face recognition computer vision systems. But in this case, this video is no deepfake, and as you can see, this deepware AI uses all these different kind of models to detect if there might be a deepfake. And if you put in known deepfakes, it gives you a higher prediction percentage. In this case, it says 0 or 1. So it uses different deepfake detectors, and then again, it's what they call an ensemble approach. So a combination of different filters and models that might help you, fact check if videos or images are faked. So these are just a couple of tools that you might be able to use. And again, it's an arms race, but these tools might help you, especially if you have this hunch, something might be off with this video. It might be worth a try to use those and see what it gives you.
Yeah, and then the kind of final phase, which I think we sometimes don't think about enough, is the distribution phase. And again, I'd like to just kind of highlight the work that Miden are doing here, which is that when we're fact checking, we often need to the goal is to reach the people who have been affected by the misinformation, right? It's not necessarily to reach the people who are already following our fact checks and who are very loyal audiences for us. Often our work is trying to help people who maybe they don't follow us as fact checkers, but they've been impacted by some misinformation. And so the way that Miden approaches this is really interesting, because they're using that similarity analysis to show that these 100 people have all sent the same fact check. Now that's a signal to the fact checker of priority, because I want to check the thing that's been sent to me 100 times and not the thing that's been sent to me once. But when I've done that fact check, the Miden system is also distributing that fact check to all of the people who'd sent me the original claim. So it's providing it's giving the right people the right information at the right time. There was also another group doing this. I need to dig up their link, who are monitoring Facebook for people who are sharing COVID misinformation. And it was making sure that the fact checks were automatically submitted again to people who had shared a piece of misinformation. So I think there's a lot more potential for us to think about ways that AI can help us reach the audiences with the people who really need information at the right time. So we've looked at the whole process. There are some good tools out there, not yet in Arabic, but I know, for example, that the Arish team localized the InVid plugin into Arabic. So there's always people working on translating these tools. But it's also important to think about not just what are the opportunities that AI presents for us to help us do our work more efficiently or more effectively, but to also think about what are the risks of AI, because for sure there's a downside to all of this. Now, some people, and I was, who was I speaking to? I was speaking to someone the other day who said, I've got a friend who works in a newsroom, and he says that they're never going to use AI because he sees the risks as being too big. I don't think that that's a very sustainable process to take. If you as a journalist don't want to use AI, then you're probably not going to be able to use Google. Now, that's a very crucial tool for all of us to be able to find the information that we're looking for. So I'm not telling you these risks to say that we shouldn't engage with AI. It's more to understand the landscape of what's out there. We've already touched on some of these things, but specifically for fact checkers, there are some big risks. And so I actually just asked ChatGPT to try and summarize what some of these risks might be. And I think we can highlight, I think these four are all really relevant. One is, and this goes back to Hisham's question earlier, we don't want to become overly reliant. So I've been working in fact checking for a long time, and I remember around 2016 when Trump was being elected in the US and the Brexit referendum happened in the UK. There was a lot of money that was given to companies that were basically truth boxes. And the idea was, I'm going to send a claim and this AI is going to tell me whether this thing is real or fake. Or I'm going to send an image or a video and an AI is going to tell me whether this is real or fake. Now, there's a big kind of philosophical question there, which is, if the AI says, oh, this video is fake, our first question will be, well, how do you know? And on what basis are you saying that? We all need to keep the skills that we have as journalists and fact checkers, and we need to not be reliant just on AI. It should be a tool and an indicator for us, but we all provide context and nuance and expertise that can help us better understand it. So we need to not become overly reliant. The second point here is that, and we also touched on this, is that AI algorithms are not objective. They're only as good as the data that they're trained on. And if that data contains errors, then it's likely that the AI will reproduce those errors. So we need to think very carefully about making sure that any AI we're using is trained on reliable data that is not biased, which is a very difficult thing to find. The third one, and I think this is the real risk that we're already seeing, and Lorenz has given some good examples, is that the AI can be used to generate fake news and disinformation, and it can make our jobs more difficult. We already feel like, and somebody in the chat has given the example of the earthquake, that we're surrounded by misinformation and disinformation. It's already too much. Well, now imagine AIs that are trained to generate that. That's a very scary world, because we're all overworked. Our teams are all small. We don't have some of the amazing tools that really big newsrooms sometimes have. And so this ability of AI to increase both the quantity of mis and disinformation and the quality of mis and disinformation, making it harder for us to detect it, is a real risk, and is something that is why I was very excited actually to be invited to speak about AI and fact checking, is because we need to be aware of that risk, and we need to be using AI to help us make our work really efficient, and help you and use the tools like Lawrence has showed to help us with our investigations. And then finally, there's a risk around privacy and making sure that we're not sharing personal information. But you'll see ChatGPT concludes that AI can be a useful tool for fact checkers, but it's important to be aware of these potential risks. So we've teased out a couple of these risks that really relate to that third point around malicious use. And so NewsGuard, which is an American company that use algorithms to rate the reliability of different news sources, did some interesting research around that looked at how ChatGPT could really increase the scale of misinformation as a kind of a distribution vector, right? If a tool like ChatGPT is trained on bad data, then it's likely to share misleading information. And because ChatGPT is looking at millions of web pages in its data set, for sure, there is some misinformation. And coming back to Hisham's point, or whoever it was who said the thing about objectivity, if we ask ChatGPT a question and it gives us an answer, we're likely to maybe we're going to trust it. But they looked at a whole series of cases where ChatGPT was actually repeating misinformation. So that is a question for us as fact checkers: is how do we engage with people building these tools to make sure that the work that we're doing to debunk and investigate and fact check misinformation is incorporated into what they're doing.
And again, yes, I think we put these images right here because this is also a generative AI, and you might be mistaken, which is not really, which is totally understandable. But again, if you look at the hand of the person on the left, you can see it has, again, even 7 or 8 fingers, I would say, on one hand. And you can expect, again, to see people deliberately generating images and putting them up online and having a reason to, it's not just maybe misinformation, but also disinformation in a way. And we at the beginning, we might not know their intention, but again, we have to research the source. And again, with the disinformation, you could say that the cost almost goes down to zero of creating this kind of imagery and also text with ChatGPT. And fact checkers can only do so much. So again, it's nice to have these tools at your disposal where you can counter them and can check them maybe a bit more easily. But I think as maybe with other platforms also will have a responsibility, especially when it comes to generating AI. And I think the sentiment of most of the audience nowadays doesn't really matter which continent you are, is that platforms need to take up their responsibility and help people here. So they have to sort of install these kinds of guards as well to see if an image has been manipulated, generated. It goes for audio, video, but also for texts. But still, yeah, it could expect to see way more of this, and we hope you can still use your sort of agnostic or hardware software agnostic senses of being a fact checker. So always look at the source and why is someone spreading it, where did it start, so to ask these kinds of questions, and then know that you have some new tools at your disposal.
Yeah, my prediction my prediction for the next for the future of fact checking is going to be that a lot of you are going to end up counting a lot of fingers, because now really after any big news event, there's going to be somebody who's generating imagery that can look extremely realistic. My team, so I have some, we work on content production, and we were looking actually at the Adobe stock library. And in the Adobe welcomes AI generated imagery, but asks that it be clearly labeled as being generated by an AI. But we found many examples where it wasn't. And so it's a very real risk, even if you're a well-established newsroom and are using tools that you're paying for, that unless you're very careful, you could end up using one of these AI generated images. So you're all going to be counting fingers, you're all going to be looking at ears, you're all going to be looking at teeth and hair. But those things are going to change, and the AI is going to be improving on hands and ears and teeth all the time. So that's the end of our little presentation. I think we'll share the slides with everybody, and we'll so you'll be able to look at the examples that we've presented. We've got some lists of tools, but I'd love to hand over to some questions. I can see some more in the chat. Hagar, maybe you can throw some over to us, and we'll do our best.
بالتأكيد توم، يعني حتى الآن ويبينار مليء بالمعلومات والأدوات والأمثلة، ويعني يمكن حابة في البداية أزيح بعض الأسئلة المرتبطة باستراتيجيات تدقيق الحقائق. هناك أسئلة عن استراتيجيات المؤسسات الكبرى في تدقيق الحقائق، وإذا كان هناك أدلة وما إلى ذلك. أود أن أشير إلى أن الشبكة العربية لمدققي المعلومات لديها بالفعل دليل لتدقيق معلومات ما قبل النشر، عدته ضمن مشروع صح، وهو متوفر على موقع الشبكة العربية لمدققي المعلومات من أريج. يمكنكم الوصول إليه عبر موقع الشبكة مباشرة أو عبر موقع أريج بالوصول إلى، يعني ستجدون هناك الروابط لموقع الشبكة وللدليل. أيضا يعني واضح أنه الويبينار يا توم ويا لورنس حتى جذب آخرين ممن ليس لهم علاقة بالصحافة ولكن هم مهتمين حتى بالAI. يعني لدينا أسئلة عن سوق العقارات والAI واستخدام العقارات في الAI. لدينا أيضا أسئلة عن ما زال هناك السؤال الكلاسيكي المرتبط بما هو وضع البشر عندما يدخل الAI في عملية تدقيق المعلومات. يعني هناك سؤال عن هل الAI يمكن أن يستبدل من عبد المؤمن؟ هل يمكن أن يستبدل مدققي المعلومات بشكل كامل؟ وأنا حابة هنا يعني أعيد صياغة السؤال، يمكن حتى يعني نخرج بمناقشة شوية مختلفة، إنه هل عملية التدقيق الحقائق يمكن أن يتم عملية أتمتتها بنسبة 100% في رأيكما؟
Well, my thought is that no, it can't, and that's based on having seen people try and remove the humans from fact checking over a number of years, and it comes back to that the almost philosophical point of do we trust a machine to tell us if something is true or if it's false? And I think it's quite difficult for a machine to definitively make that case. And some tools get around this, as some of the ones that Lawrence is highlighting, for example. They're not saying that this is 100% a deepfake. What they'll say is that using these factors, we'd calculate that this maybe is 80% deepfake. Now, that's not something a journalist can use. There's still more work that needs to be done. So I think there are fields of journalism that I think will be impacted but more by AI. So weather journalism, for example, or sports journalism or market journalism. And we know this because newsrooms like AP and YLE in Finland, they're already using AI to write articles about quarterly earnings reports or about ice hockey matches. But I think investigative journalism and fact-checking are two areas where I don't think that AIs will replace us. I think that they can be used to support us, and they'll definitely be used against us. But a human will always be needed to provide that context and that judgment based on more factors than any one tool is able to provide.
Yeah, and to add to Tom's words is, I think that in every step of a process where a human is now involved and maybe an AI tool might step in somewhere in the process, it's still a human who decides that an AI needs to do something. So a human you have to sort of brief someone on what the system should do. Say if it were to translate documents or something, then a human would have to find the data and say, let's work on these documents because I think these documents are important. So that's where the human responsibility is as well. Then in the end, if the systems does predictabilities, then a human have to sort of vet and verify if it's accurate and have to see if it's meeting the goals that they were stating at the start. So again, then it's a human with every step along the process that is telling an AI system if it does its job wrong or right. So in that respect, there's always a human needed. An AI system cannot just start doing something on its own, and we train it to do a certain task, say classify documents or do a transcription of an audio interview. And then that's what it was trained for. And it was trained to do that by humans because humans need this task. So in that respect, I think there will always be a human responsibility. And with that, there will always be bias. Because if you think you will manage to reach the biggest audience by checking statements of these politicians, because you know everyone watches these politicians, so these politicians might get more checked. And you can teach a system to do that, but you can also teach your editors or your newsroom to say, if we go after these politicians, we will sell more ads on television or on our website. So again, these are all human choices where you might use an AI for, but then still it has been a human choice from the beginning, and also in the end, if you think it works well. So in a way, AI is also a mirror to us. It shows us what we already did online for these last years, and we know that it's skewed towards the US, white Western males, for example. And this is what is encountered mostly online. So this is how our systems are trained. So if you want to use these systems, then this is something you should know from the start, that humans have put up the data, and then the AI is trained with human data. So in that respect, I'm not afraid of the systems. I'm afraid of humans, to be honest. I'm afraid of humans in this respect. Yes.
لدينا أيضا سؤال يعني فيه بعض من الذكاء. هل شات جي بي تي بإمكانه أن يخبرنا إذا كان هناك فيديو مزيف بتقنية الديب فيك أو لا، أم علينا الاعتماد على أنفسنا؟ من دكتور أسماء.
So ChatGPT, there's lots of headlines, but is just one of many tools that can do something similar, which is and what is the specific thing that ChatGPT can do? It can take a human question or an instruction, and it can provide a response in human language that is logically coherent. But it, as NewsGuard found, it will also, it can also say things that aren't true. And there was some interesting work that an academic did where he was asking ChatGPT about some quite specific fields of microbiology, and ChatGPT was very confidently answering these questions, but it was answering with absolute nonsense. It was even making up references to academic papers that didn't exist. So ChatGPT is very confident in the answers it gives, and it will appear very authoritative. But if we're looking for facts, ChatGPT is not the place to go, I'd say. And so I don't think this is why I like the ensemble approach that Lauren's proposed, which is instead of just asking one tool or one machine learning model if something's a deep fake or not, let's ask 5. And see, and those, each of those 5 will have strengths and weaknesses, but fundamentally we need to see what different systems tell us, and then we need to do our own work to investigate, and we need to make the judgment, I think. So I don't think ChatGPT can't solve all of our problems. It can solve some of them. Summarizing long articles into short tweets, very good. Asking if it can detect a deep fake, not so good.
لدينا أيضا سؤال عن قابلية تقنيات الذكاء الاصطناعي للاختراق. هل أدوات وتقنيات الذكاء الاصطناعي يمكن لأحد أن يخترقها ويسرق الداتا أو المعلومات التي تغذيها؟
Yes, for what we know is that all type of software that was man-made, which every software is, can be hacked or breached. So, and we know that a lot of companies go to great lengths, obviously, to make their software secure and your data private and confidential. But still, there will always be ways where things get hacked. And I think with most big hacks, it's always a human that's the most vulnerable, because they call up someone and ask something to maybe reset a dial or something, or I've got my password, and then someone gives it away and then they're in. So yeah, the same thing with these detection tools. These tools might work, and then sometimes they're being developed open source, and then there's a clever programmer that maybe goes on to the dark side, takes the open source and builds a counter tool. And then again, it's the arms race going up and up and up. So yeah, you always it's not usually my way of looking at the world, but in this case I would always say, if you think it can happen, it will happen. So make sure that you've went to great lengths to counter that, and especially when working with fact checks and vulnerable people or data. Yeah.
So with ChatGPT, for example, there's a whole community of people on Reddit who are trying to come up with ways to make ChatGPT break its own rules and say things that it shouldn't say. So ChatGPT, in theory, should not be able to make comments that are racist. But people on Reddit have worked out a way of kind of setting up an interaction with ChatGPT where they assign it a role, and they're able to make ChatGPT break that rule. So I kind of, as Lawrence is saying, when you provide access to a big AI model like ChatGPT, people are going to try everything, and some of it's going to work. And there are many people out there who are very interested in pushing all of the limitations, every limitation you can imagine of a tool like ChatGPT. So it means that we need to be really careful with how we understand it and how we can make use of it.
إذا يعني هو تبقى من وقت الويبينار تقريبا 6 دقائق، لذلك سأختار آخر سؤال من عبد الرحمن الشوافي، وهو سؤال الحقيقة أعتقد مهم أن ننهي به هذا الويبينار الغني بالمعلومات والأشياء يعني أثارت انتباه الكثيرين. السؤال هو عن مستقبل الإبداع والفكرة تحديداً بالنسبة للصحفيين في ظل تطور الذكاء الاصطناعي. هل سيستمر الصحفيين، يعني هل سيظل الصحفي هو مصدر الفكرة المختلفة والإبداع في ظل تطور هذه التقنيات، أم من الممكن أن نشهد تحول ما على هذا الصعيد؟
I can address this, but I'm also looking forward to hear Tom's answer. But for what I know is that a lot of scholars on creativity, they tell us that you've got sort of 3 levels of creativity, where one is something where you sort of try to see where the boundaries are. So that's where generative AI is now, because it produces photos, videos, and texts in a way, and audio. So it's all familiar formats. Although it's synthesized, it still has to, we think it looks like a news article, it looks like a person, and there's not real creativity there, because it's all things we already know or might have encountered. Then the second one is more of a combinatorial, so then creativity, that's how in a way they said the press was discovered by taking German wine farmers wine presses and then Chinese movable type, put it together, and you've got the printing press. So that's where people combine from different worlds or different domains or industries, and therefore you might already need humans, because it's hard for a machine to do that. And then the highest level would be transformative, and I think the word transformative was already being used by the translator. And that is I read this weekend that Newton, when he discovered one of the laws of physics, he saw this apple falling from the tree, right? And he saw something, and he was looking at the moon, and he combined these concepts and thought, well, there might be part of the same laws of physics, and I'm not a physician, so I'm not really deep into that knowledge. But then this AI professor told, this means real creativity, to see 2 separate things and combine them and come up with a new way of looking at the world, which was very transformative. So in that respect, take this to journalism. If you might hear people on the street discussing something, you've read into particular documents or reports, and then you talk about it with your coworkers, other journalists in the newsroom, and then you find that you have a story. That is something that an AI will never do. It won't be on the street, it won't be in his mind, and then talking to coworkers and then have this idea. So this kind of creativity and thinking about, if I combine these 2 tools, if I ask a question a bit different, if I phone up, instead of person A, I phone up person C, this would be true creativity that a machine will never be able to pull off. And well, we only have to worry, someone said, when a machine might be lovesick, right? If a machine could ever encounter something like that and it could not perform because it says, I was in love, someone broke my heart, then we are in trouble. But I think that moment we will never get to, because we humans, we will be very needed. That would be my final answer.
And I'll give a very quick final answer, which is that I see a lot of these tools and uses of AI as being something that can actually free up time for us to be creative. And I've got tremendous faith in the creativity of journalists. But I also know that there's a lot of things that we have to do that take away our time from being able to be creative. And so I think the more that we can think of ways of working that reduces our concentration and our cognitive load on those tasks where really a person's creativity is not most at work, then the more time we will have to be thinking creatively and to kind of imagine a different future.
شكرا توم، شكرا لورنس. يعني جلسة غنية ومليئة بالمعلومات، وبالتأكيد يعني الكثيرين تعلموا الكثير اليوم. يمكن كان هذا السؤال وكانت إجابات توم ولورنس على السؤال الأخير أفضل ختام للويبينار الثاني من مشروع صح لعام 2023 بتنظيم الشبكة العربية لمدققي المعلومات من أريج ضمن برنامج قريب الذي تنفذه الوكالة الفرنسية للتنمية الإعلامية وتموله الوكالة الفرنسية للتنمية. سعدنا بجميع الحاضرين وسنسعد أكثر بآرائكم عبر التقييم. لينك الاستمارة موجود على الشات، وأيضا أن تشاركونا ما تعلمتموه من أدوات وأمثلة، وربما يعني أن تمروا على الأدوات والقصص التي عرضها كل من توم ولورنس كأمثلة على استخدامات الذكاء الاصطناعي في الصحافة وفي تدقيق المعلومات، وتشاركونا يعني انطباعاتكم وآرائكم وما تعلمتموه عبر وسمي قريب ميديا وصح عبر منصات التواصل الاجتماعي. شكرا لكم لجميع الحاضرين، شكرا لتوم، شكرا للورنس، ونلقاكم في ويبينار قادم من AFCN ومشروع صح. كانت معكم هاجر هشام، دمتم بخير.